Let me start by first just saying welcome to everybody. It's great to see so many familiar faces. It's truly, warms our heart to see, so many people that are sacrificing their hour at the end of their day, which is really a busy day. As we know, today time just keeps running and we never know at the end of the day how much time is lost. But, this is the second of two very intimate sessions with key foundation partners, donors, county and state leaders who participated and help us co-create this plan. So we want to go ahead and get started. I want to first introduce myself. I'm Andre Chapman, CEO of Unity Care, founder and CEO, as well as Carl Eggers, our board president, and Mark Lang, a new Unity Care board member. Now, I think we can put this in presentation mode. So I'm going to ask Rachel if you can go ahead and jump into the presentation and we can get started.
Should be in presentation mode. Can you guys confirm if you can see this slide?
Yes.
All right, we can see it. All right, can you go to the next slide? So this image, and many of you may have seen this image before, but it's the Sankofa symbol, which is used by the Akan people of Ghana. Is generally depicted as a bird with his head turned backward, taking an egg from its back. It expresses the importance of reaching back to knowledge gained in the past and bringing it into the present in order to make positive progress into the future. So I'm going to spend a brief moment talking about our 28 years of knowledge gained. Guys, 28 years. I started the organization when I was 10 years old. 28 years of knowledge gained. And then Mark Lang, who is one of the leads with the Stanford alumni consulting team that facilitated, along with 8 other wonderful folks, a 7-month, very intensive strategic planning process, and has recently joined the board. We'll talk about the plan in the present, and then Carl Eggers, who's our board president, will close out with our future goals and some Q&A at the end. So let's begin with, we opened the first home in 1993. On August 14th, we accepted our very first young man into our residential housing program. The organization continued to grow over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, as many of us can imagine, providing housing, mental health, and community-based services to over 7,000 youth and families per year, employing over 200 staff across 20 different programs, 3 different counties, all based on our core values of servant leadership. Then in 2015, we released our 5-year strategic plan, aligning our services into what we call our 5 pillars of success, with housing being our core foundation. Next slide. So this slide really gives us major milestones that stand out for us as we look back over the 5 or 6 years between 15 and 20. And one of the data points for our 2015 plan was that we had surveyed over 1,000 people who had been in one of our programs over the past 20 years. And a common theme of existing challenges that they were still dealing with when we did this survey was housing. So we wanted to make sure that housing was our #1 priority. And we knew if we couldn't ensure our folks were housed, then it was impossible to work on their education, their employment, their well-being, or unconditional care. So at the same time, we were very fortunate enough to partner with Silicon Valley Community Foundation, and under the leadership, when Gina actually partnered with me on this, to release an impact report on the challenges of the state's major overhaul of foster care called CCR in the middle of the Bay Area housing crisis through the lens of foster youth that forced the closure of state group homes and the opening of STRTPs, which was short-term residential treatment programs. And then in that same year, 2018, which was really a busy year for us, as we were preparing for our 25-year anniversary event, Youth Live, we were contacted by the Emma McConnell Clark Foundation, which is the Avon family, for those that may not know that foundation. They were very interested in our TAY model that we have been operating since 1997, which was really our largest standing program with some amazing outcomes. And they wanted to evaluate us for consideration of their 3-year Propel Next cohort. So again, as we were preparing for our silver anniversary, going through this, this evaluation of Propel, We also really began conversations with Seneca around the opportunity of bringing together their mental health services, leveraging our cultural proficiency, and moving towards a potential merger. So there's a lot of things going on for us in 2018. I will tell you, by October of 2018, when I went to the first workshop concerning Propel Next, there was this one thing that kind of stood out for me. And it was a workshop that had their prior 2 classes of cohorts, and it was a focus on their CEO's expectation and experience with Propel Next. And it forced, one of the things that stood out was one of the CEOs said, Propel Next forces us to get smaller before they got larger, because it forced you as an organization to focus on the things that you did really well versus the things that you just did. And we began our theory of change at that time, really pulling apart our TAE program, because that was the program that this initiative was very focused on, and redefining our model. So by the end of 2018, coming off the heels of closing down our STRTP, and that partnership we had developed with Seneca was really, again, like I said, it was a perfect combination of us becoming a part of the Seneca family of agencies. We really went deep in Propel. And for that moment, it really stood out for us because it was a time in the market where I could talk to people about foster care. Oftentimes when I talk to people about foster care, either they can think about an aunt or a grandmother or a neighbor that said, oh yeah, I think I know a little bit about foster care, but oftentimes people don't really understand foster care. But this was one time that I could talk to people about foster care through the lens of housing, and they really understood it. And so as an organization, we decided after about 4 months of going down this road and looking at a potential merger that we were not going to merge, but we were going to spin off all of our community-based services and use this opportunity through Propel Next to become a singular focus organization, going very deep in our housing model, and really allowing this Propel Next initiative to really be our North Star and guide us to where we can help really the organization focus solely on eradicating homelessness for kids that are aging out of foster care. So we kicked off our first strategic planning meeting on August of 2019. It was the Seneca executive staff, it was the Unity Care executive staff and board, and it was led by a Propel Next coach. And that's when we began our big audacious goals of what should Unity Care look like over the next 5 to 10 years. And that began in August of 2019, our outreach of looking for an organization that we think could really lead this effort. And I called, again, Silicon Valley Community Foundation, called Gina, and it was a recommendation to look at the folks at Stanford. And so that really began our conversation with the folks at Stanford. And so as we were going through getting into 2019, as you can imagine, the pandemic hit. We applied to Stanford, they selected us, we were fortunate to be selected, and then all of a sudden, the pandemic hit. So we had the pandemic, we had the social uprising, a lot of things were going on in 2019. And so we were put on hold regarding the strategic plan process. And at the same time, what we saw in the organization, we saw about a 30% increase in the need of housing for young folks that had no place to go, because many of these foster youth that were aging out of the foster care system really found themselves with no jobs and housing that they lost because they didn't have jobs to move into their apartments or move in with roommates. So like many of us that are on this call, we saw just a huge impact of young folks that had no place to go in the foster care system. So for us as an organization, we also were dealing with the pandemic, and we saw that the pandemic was disproportionately impacting foster youth as well as communities of color, particularly African-American communities. And we launched an initiative called COVID Black 19, which was really an educational campaign to reduce the spread of COVID. And then fortunately, the Stanford process reemerged again in the fall of September, because we were then put into the fall class. And we then began conversations with the folks at Stanford. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about Propel. So Propel is a 3-year intensive capacity building program implemented by Learning for Action that helps promising nonprofits transform into high-performing, data-driven organizations. The program was incubated, as I said, by Ed McConnell Clark Foundation, but The funders behind it, which were really strong partners with us for Unity Care, was the Sobrato Family Foundation and the Heinz Simons Foundation, which have been really strong partners with us. Through this partnership and through this 3-year initiative, we've received a combination of unrestricted funding as well as an equal investment in expert coaching, group learning sessions, peer learning communities to enhance our program model and implement strong performance management systems that helped us really develop an organizational culture that practices ongoing learning and evaluations. Next slide. It's kind of like go to the next slide, please. It's kind of like the framework of a house. So this is what it looks like for us as an organization. So our past 3 years has been us really going deep into our house and really building out, based upon our theory of change, our data systems, a robust performance measurement system that allows our teams to use data for improved decision-making and impact. And many of our county partners that we've been sharing our data with, at any moment, we can pull up and see the status of every young person in our program, what our case managers are doing, our clinicians, the effectiveness of the interventions that we're performing. We're using technology to leverage that so we can pull up on our smart devices to say how much time this week we spent with a young person working on their educational plan or their housing plan. We can also make adjustments as we go to focus on the acuity levels of young folks tied to their what's called their CANS and their Ansel Casey assessments. So it really gives our staff and our managers and our young folks a point in time today of how they're doing in the program and what particular changes that are necessary to make. It's been a phenomenal process. It has been a really hard process for us, but through the support of Propel Next, we've just come to the end of that 3-year initiative. And because of that, one of the initiatives about, concerning Propel is a new strategic plan. So go to the next slide. So as a requirement, as we're considering coming to also the end of our 5-year, that 15 to 20 plan, the Stanford Alumni Consulting Team has been a tremendous asset. And when we were selected by them, really it was that March of 2020 in the middle of the pandemic, and then being able to start again in September. It was a very meticulous, detailed process, and I can't say more accommodations for the folks that led this effort. And through that process, Mark Lang, who was the Stanford lead on the project, has now joined us on the board. And so I'm going to hand it off to Mark to go deep into the strategic plan and tell you a little bit about that process.
Okay, thank you, Andre. If we can go to the next slide. So yes, meticulous, detailed, challenging, difficult. I'm sure everybody on this call has in one way or another been involved with some kind of a strategic planning process. But I think it would be worth spending just a minute to talk about why bother, right? Why do this? Why is it important, And there'd be 2 reasons. One is focus, right? When you have a really clear sense of direction and focus, your priorities are easier to set, right? You can manage a higher level of alignment with everybody in the organization, and you're a lot more agile, right? If you're focused, you're better able to adjust and adapt because you know where the core of your attention is devoted. And then the other big reason is performance, obviously, right? To the degree that you have a very clear strategic plan, you're setting your priorities carefully, you're in a better position to scale and develop sustainable programs and drive better outcomes, right? So really the big so what of why a strategic plan is to support focus and performance. In terms of the team, a lot of people on this call were really direct contributors. As we were doing interviews, the Alumni Consulting Team is a pro bono organization that just deploys former mercenaries to try to make up for lost time and do some good in support of causes that matter, right? And so what we found was this community was incredibly generous. People on this call and others were very forthcoming, very, very candid, very direct with their information. So the team was obviously Andre, the executive leadership team of Unity Care, the board, working very closely with these Stanford alums. And it was a team effort. It was tremendous collaboration between operating management and board members. It felt very flat, very level, very open, very direct. So it was a good, clean process and a great team. And then there were a lot of stakeholders involved here, and people on this call represent that range. We got tremendous insight from people in the counties and cities around the Bay Area, from partners, foundations, donors, advisors, and peer organizations. This is a team effort trying to solve the problem of what happens to transition age youth and how well are they supported, right? So tremendous support, and you can see in the logo garden there just a sample of the range of people who guided us as we pulled the plan together. Okay, and so thank you to all of you who participated. Next slide, please. So what is the process, just really quickly, for developing a plan? And this might be useful to you to the degree you're part of a process like this in the future. We started with a lot of research, a lot of primary data. People were very forthcoming with really granular information and data, which was very helpful. The Propel Next Foundation helped us quite a lot. We did 47 interviews across the range of stakeholders and interests that I described a minute ago. We did surveys, obviously of our own employees and their field experience, but also outbound surveys. And then we also surveyed board members. It's really hard. Board members are really busy people generally. And so we had a process where we would ping them with really specific questions in advance of each of the 90-minute sessions that we did, working sessions with the board and operating management. And this process was fabulous because we got everybody's thinking in advance of the meeting on the topics at hand. And you might consider this when you're trying to broker a process like this, is getting people's thoughts in advance. We called it homework. This board did their homework. They worked really hard on it, as did the staff. So there was a lot of effort involved in getting the information we needed together. And then we did a whole lot of analysis. We built frameworks, 4 boxes, all kinds of grids, frameworks basically to clarify our thinking about the different dimensions that had to inform a plan. We had these working sessions. And then the result, the strategic plan itself, you're not going to find a 200-page Word document. It's a working deck. It is agile. It will evolve, right, as the environment changes, as new demands are put on the organization. But the first thing the board and management did was step back and say, okay, what is our mission? And I'm going to get to that in a minute because it's actually really important. Also defined or refined our vision and our values as an organization, which are remarkably constant over the 28 years. And then we set really specific milestones in this plan. So just to make sure we don't have the binder on shelf syndrome, right? We set specific milestones for every one of the strategic initiatives, and we have named individuals and specific dates attached to getting things done on those fronts. So very, very happy with the back end accountability. Next slide. So let's talk about the mission. Earlier, for the first 20 years of Unity Care's existence, the mission was to provide quality youth and family programs, right, for the purpose of creating healthier communities through lifelong partnerships. That's a really broad mandate. Youth and family programs is a huge remit, and it was perfect for the 20-some programs that Unity Care was managing at the time, right? We have focused, in part because of the Propel Next experience and the effort of pulling this plan together, all about focus, all about performance. And so it's like an elevator pitch when you think about a mission, right? If you only had, 3 seconds before the elevator doors open, what would you tell your stakeholder? You would say, we transform the lives of young people, right? That's what everybody on this call cares about doing. And that's what Unity cares about, okay? And then we get specific. We transform the lives of young people emerging from foster care. So we know who we're supporting here. These are transition age youth emerging from foster care. And then we get specific about what it is we provide, right? Stable housing, caring connections, and life skills. And then there's a whole lot that goes into that, as I know many of you know far better than I ever will, right? And then here's the so what, that build a foundation to achieve their potential. We thought it was really important in this mission statement to emphasize the degree to which we are about them becoming self-supporting, self-sustaining adults and contributors, right? So that's the current mission statement. If you haven't memorized it yet, don't worry, it's on the website. You'll always find it there. And hopefully it'll stick for a while, we'll see. Next slide. So the five initiatives, this strategic plan has 5 major initiatives, and underlying them are a total of about 14 tracks. And I won't go into that detail because who has time, but just trust me, it's very granular. What I'm going to give you today is just an overview of the 5 major initiatives, the big pushes. And the important thing to know here is we are working on all 5 of these fronts in the strategic plan simultaneously. Okay, so we want to optimize our approaches to housing and services. We also want to refine our program portfolio strategy. Well, those things don't happen one after the other, right? They have to happen together. So let's talk about each 5. In terms of our approach to housing, we want to make sure that we've looked at the best range of models, and we've done the math on the best mix of models in our housing portfolio between owning, leasing, renting, referring, different economic arrangements to support the housing continuum that Andre talks about, okay? And building on our Propel Next experience there. In the same way with services, we want to make sure, and we're doing mini business plans for our service lines so that we're really specific around how scalable and sustainable they are based on analysis, okay? And based on our Propel Next experience, right? Both for how we're running them now and how can we learn from the way they're operating. The second big initiative is around a program portfolio strategy. And if you're getting buzzword saturation at this point, bear with me. It's very important to think about the range of services you provide as a portfolio, right? That all of them have to operate both on mission and on margin. You have to be very clear about the trade-offs. Not everyone is going to make margin for you, so you have some loss leaders. But you have to do the math and you have to be clear about the mission. So we're focusing on developing a really disciplined program portfolio strategy where we continually analyze and refine the portfolio of services, right? Both for mission fit and financial sustainability. And we're going to pursue partnerships where they strengthen our core programs and augment and extend our capabilities. But this is a do the math and make sure it's on mission exercise. And that's going to mean that we prune some services. It's going to mean that we go longer in some directions than we have in the past, right? Based on the math and the mission. Okay. The third, of course, and this applies to any organization, certainly your organization, is how do you acquire and engage and retain really great talent? So we're focused, big part of the plan, strategic initiatives focus around employee retention and development and engagement. We're focusing on expanding the executive leadership team at Unity Care. We are developing really thoughtful succession plans across the organization so that everybody's got a very clear successor and deputy that they're coaching and cultivating. And then we're selectively expanding our board expertise, right, to fill in some gaps. The fourth, which I think will matter to anybody who's involved, with a city or a county, is consistency, right? Being really consistent about our delivery. And we want to be consistent in our processes and delivery across all the regions that we operate in, right? So we're standardizing and strengthening our internal processes. We're improving the uniformity of our onboarding and our ongoing training. And then we're also refining our technology stack, right? Because, and Andre referred to this, to the degree that we're effective in using appropriate technology, right? Tools that really work for us and to support the kids. We're going to do our jobs better and deliver more programmatic excellence. And then the fifth, which also pertains to a lot of folks on this call, is around our relationships and building our relationships, and of course, the revenue that is associated with those relationships, many of them. So we want to deepen our partnerships with our public sector partners and with philanthropies and donors. And that will entail sharing more of our outcomes data, more of what we've been learning from the Propel Next process, so that the stakeholders really understand the impact we're having on transition age youth, okay? So that's a quick summary of the overall plan. Next slide. So this is how we're implementing. Rachel, just give me the first, yeah, thank you. So I talked about this. This is building on Propel Next. Next slide, next click, please. I think I covered this. Isn't this great, you guys? You don't have to listen to me repeat myself. I think I spoke to all this already. Yeah, I think we've covered this. So So the most important thing to know about these milestones is they're codified. We have named individuals accountable for leading, and we have teams supporting those individuals for every one of these initiatives. These are milestones just for the first fiscal year for us. We're on a June fiscal, right? Ending June 2022. But we've got these milestones mapped out for the entire 5-year period. And I think we're genuinely excited about the degree to which this plan is getting real in a real hurry. So with that, I will turn it over to Carl.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you so much for that, and for all your help and support through this process. Before I get started, I do have to give Mark a hard time because he glossed over the whole homework thing. Let me tell you, they gave us so much homework. I felt like our weekend, on the weekends, like I was in B school myself. So I say, if you go down this path, I highly recommend it, but definitely be prepared to buckle in and and put your time in. But it was definitely a labor of love. So thank you for that. So, you know, obviously with any strategic plan, the biggest question is how do you move forward? I think, you know, Mark has sort of walked you through the how operationally we're moving forward, but then the question is, well, what do we expect when we do? So next slide. We really have, you know, 3 core overarching goals. You know, the first is doubling our capacity. This is doubling the capacity of the youth that we're able to house and serve in the 8 counties that Unity Care now operates in. And if you've spoken to Andre at all in the last, you know, year or so, he's probably talked to you about the housing continuum. And it's very interesting because I started to think about this housing continuum and as it relates to my very own kids who recently graduated from college, and they kind of went through this progression of sort of the dorm style living when they left home here, and they were in environments that did have a little bit more support and control around them while they were in the dorms, and then they kind of progressed from that to a shared homes where they had a handful of roommates and a little bit more freedom and less control, but still had a few of the supportive services. And now they have kind of launched into living in their own apartments independently, and that's really what the housing continuum is about: is to help create a path for the youth that we serve to moving from you know, into the dorm style environments all the way through to a sustained living environment where they are out on their own. And one of the ways that we've been doing that, it started with expanding and investing in how we get our young people, you know, through to independence. A few years ago, we started a project Safe Haven with MinPen and other developers who were willing to carve out apartment units in communities they were developing. And we started, I think it was 2013, correct if I'm wrong, Andre, with a 5-year project with MinPen and the other developers to set aside 10 youth specifically for foster youth at rates below market. And the cool thing about it is that they now have confidence that they will be able to maintain their home environment within their means while they're going through matriculating, going to school, building work experience. And at the other end of that, you know, 5 years, they then are able to take over the lease at market rate, but they've had a much more progressive and obtainable growth pattern through that process. And we're really looking at working on increasing the scale of that model across the communities that we serve. Also a part of that is a navigation program. And the navigation project is essentially a 6-month plan that we work on with the youth as they advance through this process to sort of ensure that permanency. We've worked in partnership with San Francisco County Human Services Agency, launching this project initially that now connects the foster youth with our housing specialists to assist them through getting and obtaining vouchers, accessing access to different developers and landlords to secure their housing. So they're never out there on their own trying to figure this out. The navigation is set up to ensure that that they have an ultimate plan in place that is actionable and feasible to keep them now in a permanent, sustainable housing environment. And then ultimately, we want to eradicate the whole concept of homelessness for former foster youth. And that's where everyone on this call comes in, if you go to the next slide, because we can't do that all alone. Certainly, we always encourage the financial support. We would never not, but it's much bigger than that, right? There's so many ways to help join us in this process. We need support and insights and expertise from the builder community, from our public partners. We don't profess to have all the answers. We do have the drive and the mission and the team that's ready to put it to practice. And so, from a board member, I welcome expertise to come in and help us really plan through some of these. Mark went through those initiatives, and there are project plans behind every one of them. And every one of those project plans identifies resources from thought, knowledge, as well as of financial means that we need to pull it all off. And I think, also we started this process doing a lot of Q&A. The ACT team went out, as Mark said, and interviewed about 47 plus individuals. We want to keep that process going. So after you've had an opportunity to sit with this project, this plan, we'd love any of your feedback. If you have specific ideas now that we're on the other side and you see where we're trying to go, or recommendations, we would love to hear them on an ongoing basis.
I love Unity Care, and I love the vision that you just outlined for us here. And I'm super excited that the work we did with Mid-Penn Housing and the pilot program that we started together is being adopted by other housing developers. And Andre, I want to be a part. So I want to be a part of it. So I'll be in touch with you shortly.
All right.
Actually, I do have one question. What would you consider your, what is the greatest need right now for the vision that you just outlined, the mission that you just outlined, the new direction Unity Care is heading, and this audacious goal to eradicate homelessness for any young person that has found themselves in the system? I love the bold, audacious vision and goal. And I guess my question would be, what's the biggest need?
Yeah, Beth, that's a good question. I probably wasn't as prepared to answer that. I would say money. I mean, I think that, and Beth, and just for the folks, when we did Project Safe Haven at Mid-Penn, it was 10 units set aside, 10 units that were set aside, and the developers charged us basically their cost. And so the young person only paid $500 a month for 5 years. So think about that, right? And so there's a delta between what it cost the developer versus what they were being paid. And Mid-Penn actually, they actually ate that delta for that 5 years. And in talking to other developers, we want to either fundraise for that delta or, backfill that with vouchers. But when the vouchers aren't available, we want to be able to fundraise and pay that cost so that those young folks have 10 units that never go away. And if you go to our website, Silicon Valley Community Foundation did a report on this model. And I never forget what one young lady said, who had been in our program for a couple of years, was that this was the first time that she felt, although she was stable, she still felt unstable in a stable environment, because she had spent 15 years bouncing around from pillow to post, and she had her own apartment, going to school, going to work, but she still had this sense of being unstable, where at any point she could lose her housing. And that's the trauma that a lot of these young folks have, is that at any point tomorrow they could lose their housing. And so by us saying, you're here for 5 years, you don't have to worry about ever moving in that time period so that you can focus on going to school and going to work is exactly what we give our kids. Think about it. Think about the safety net that our kids have. You know, they can come back home after when college is over and they stay. You know, we want to kick them out, but they're there because they know they have a place to fall back on. And that's why this independence with developers and what we did with Mid-Penn as that pilot project, and the outcomes were phenomenal. It was a great framework and example of how we could scale and create housing within communities that are normalized, so that they're living next door to the grandmother who's watching her 2 kids. The neighbor next door works at Google. The neighbor upstairs to them was a teacher. The neighbor down below, you know, to the right of them, you know, is in school. So it's in normalized environments. So they get a chance to model and see other people, you know, that they've not oftentimes had connections to because they've only been in their own environment of foster care. And so that's why this model we're really pushing aggressively. And, you know, just like with Mid-Penn, another provider, EAH Housing, we're developing some carve-outs in their communities. And we're going to really push this because ultimately we think of it as no different than what we're doing for our kids when it comes to them in that age between, you know, 20 and 27, that, you know, we want them to be in a place where they are maturing and they're focusing on their going to school or going to work. And at the end of that time period, they can take over the lease and be able to have a place of permanency and not worry about transitional housing, but be in a permanent place. But it starts with them feeling safe. So that was the model that we did with Mid-Penn. And again, it was a lot of lessons learned, but from that, we developed a white paper about what worked and things we wanted to do moving forward. And now we're sharing that with other developers and asking them to now do carve-outs. And because there's been a greater focus on funding now coming from the state, developers have a lot of interest in doing this. Because before, developers didn't really want to rent, you know, didn't want to put a kid in an apartment. I mean, why would they do that when they can put a mom with disabilities or they can put a vet? You know, they didn't want to put a young person. And we wrap them with services to ensure their success while they're there. And that ultimately is the model. And these, a lot of times, they've had prior success in other housing environments. We just kind of move them along this continuum to where now they can eventually move into their own apartment and really begin to be contributing, you know, citizens back to society. Well, listen, it's 5:28. We have 2 minutes. And so on the screen is our special thanks. So as you see, there's lots of names, there's lots of folks. We're going to be sending this out to the general public next week or the end of the month. I'm not sure what the release date is, but we're going to be sending this out. So you guys got a preview of this before it went live. And hopefully this was a good educational endeavor for you to learn a little bit more deeply about the organization, what we're focused on today, and what our big audacious goals are moving forward. So thank you. Thanks to everybody for joining us. Thank you to Carl and Mark, for 2 board members that, you know, they always put their hands in the soil to help do this work. And Rachel, who was behind the scenes, you know, kind of controlling everything and the Zoom call, and everyone else that was able to join.